Hi, my name's Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. I'm a criminal psychologist and I run a business that enables me to bring knowledge and learning to everyone, not just those who are at schools, colleges and universities. And I do this by producing a range of blogs, vlogs and free online courses, but I also run some slightly more in-depth courses which are both available face-to-face and online. You don't need any previous qualifications to learn with me, and there are several subjects available, so head on over to my website and have a look at the courses to see if any of those would be of interest to you. This particular video is looking at Thomas Sweatt, who's a prolific arsonist from Washington DC in USA. With any of the psychological analyses that I do, I try to look at the offender's upbringing to see if there are any clues about their behaviour that would indicate their future activities. An initial internet search led me to some news stories and a few documentaries about his crimes. All of these articles and documentaries focused on the crimes and didn't really mention his childhood or his family life. Even the documentaries with profilers giving some commentary didn't really mention it. Once I did a bit more digging, I was able to find out a bit more and realised why they hadn't mentioned it. He had a fairly standard religious upbringing with nothing really of note or suspicion happening. For me, this in itself is quite interesting. Firstly, because it wasn't mentioned, and secondly, because he was what appeared to be normal. I think there's a little bit in all of us that have a desire to think that we can spot the rapists or murderers or arsonists or other criminals. Whenever a prolific offender is identified, you have family members coming forward who want to tell you all about their weird little quirks that they'd spotted. You have neighbours who tell of watching a strange youngster from behind twitching curtains. You have school friends who come and tell their stories. But with this case, there wasn't much of any of that. From a media point of view, I can kind of understand why they left it out. It doesn't make for a sensational or interesting story to find out that he was quiet and didn't interact with many people. The headline, "He was a normal boy from a normal family," doesn't make for a sensationalised headline, does it? The media tend to like headlines such as "sex-crazed monster tortures houses." From a family and friends perspective, they may not have come forward to tell their story because there was nothing really to tell. I'd be fairly surprised if many people even knew Thomas Sweatt's name before he was convicted. I found an article online from a reporter from the Washington City paper. He claims to have been in written communication with Sweatt. He reveals a lot of information that is generally reported about him. I think that it's very telling. Throughout these correspondences, he never really discusses his relationship with his parents beyond noting their religious beliefs. The first fire that he set was in 1985. He'd finished a night shift and he was walking home and spotted a man who he found fairly attractive. He followed the man to his home and decided he wanted to meet him. Instead of walking up to meet him, he ran home and recalled how excited that he was doing this. He took his sister's car and he drove back to the house, getting some petrol along the way. He set the fire and sat in his car watching. He told the reporter in these letters that he was glad to see the man again and that he wanted to help him, but that the fire trucks were already on their way. This tells me that Thomas Sweatt was emotionally immature. He's not likely to have had any significant relationships in the past. He has difficulty relating to people and doesn't know how to convey his emotions. In his own mind, the fire was still a connection between him and this attractive stranger, even though they didn't talk. He later recalled that he was sad that somebody had died in that particular fire, but that she was simply collateral damage in his pursuit of satisfaction. This fire was initially recorded as an accident, and it was only once Thomas Sweatt was arrested that he admitted to it. There was no need for him to admit his involvement. However, he's likely to have wanted to take credit for it because of the level of satisfaction that it gave him. He got away with setting hundreds of fires over a period of about 30 years. And this requires a person to become hidden in plain sight. I think it's highly likely that he was so quiet and withdrawn, nobody ever really noticed him. He was soft-spoken and he was kind to those people who knew him. He did speak of his large supportive family and his belief in God during his correspondence with this particular reporter. All of the information that I got suggests that he was sexually aroused by fire. A house fire is something which is really big. It can be easily seen by a lot of people. People talk about the event with emotion, which is often sadness. And I would imagine he quite liked that element of it. These events were unlike his actual personality of being soft and kind and almost invisible. I'm assuming many of us will have gone out and done something which is a little bit naughty at some point in our lives. And we've probably been quite excited by the fact that it was a little bit naughty. These fires are a much more extreme version of this. Thomas Sweatt kept a journal of all the fires that he set. These were deeply personal to him, almost like intimate moments between two people. But Thomas Sweatt lacked the emotional intelligence to have that kind of intimacy with another person, and fire setting became his outlet for that. He wrote that he believed that the Lord God Almighty had led investigators to him because it was time for it all to stop. In his words, he wrote, "It was like, come get me, I'm tired. Jail can't be any worse than the life I've had. And then, believe it or not, it is pretty much the same. It's just that I'm not free to go anywhere, wherever I want to now." This indicates that the fires were no longer giving him the excitement and the stimulation that he needed or wanted to get from them. This isn't surprising, really. If anybody does the same thing over and over again enough times, it becomes boring and tiresome. However, when he recalls the details of the fire in his letters, he writes pages and pages of detail and manages to recall some of that emotion and sexual satisfaction that it gave him. His writings also indicate how dissatisfied he was with his life. Again, though, he lacks the ability to deal with and express this dissatisfaction in appropriate ways. During the initial investigation and prosecution, Sweatt cooperated with an agreement that certain details or motives weren't released to the public. However, in his letter writing to a journalist, he tells his story in his own words. This can be fairly common with prolific offenders, especially when they're portrayed in a way that doesn't fit with their own narrative. These fires were deeply personal and enjoyable acts, and he enjoys recalling the details of them and telling somebody how much they meant to him. Sweatt recalls that the various fires grew out of various feelings. Some of them were because he felt powerless. Some of them were acts of love and intimacy, and some of them were out of spite. It's obvious that he wasn't able to express his feelings in ways other people could. These feelings were manifested in the fires that he set. He wrote that if he didn't want somebody to have a car, the fire would become a weapon to destroy it. He also said that if he liked a particular house and wished to own it one day, even though that was a dream, he would set fire to it. I'll read you what he wrote about some of the reasons for setting some of the fires. Fire is a tool to destroy, and some house fires also become my fantasy of people scrambling to exit windows and sort of feel like they need my help, so I stay and watch. Then I'd masturbate over the fire whilst driving away from the fire. It's clear that the fires are all manifestations of his feelings. Feelings such as envy, spite, adoration, sexual fulfillment. He would have been unable to communicate his feelings in ordinary ways, but these fires allowed him to feel satisfied, sometimes that was sexually. Knowing that he set these fires gave him an inner sense of fulfillment and pride. Between 2003 and 2005, Thomas Sweatt set many fires and he was eventually arrested in 2005. Many of these fires were in 2003, therefore I decided to put the points on a map to see if there were any spatial patterns which were evident. There is an area within criminal psychology known as geographical profiling. In 1993, Professor David Cantor and Larkin drew on research from several different areas and concluded that offenders will routinely visit the same areas over and over again. We all do this in our day-to-day lives. Whether offending or not, we will routinely visit the same areas, such as a particular space to exercise or a particular beauty spot, and we're less likely to venture into unknown areas of equal opportunity. This suggests that offenders not only have areas of activity, but also areas of routine activity, places where they routinely travel to or through. According to routine activity theory, any crimes or activities occur during this routine, which is normal activity, part of everyday life. These areas become a comfort zone for predatory offenders to commit their crimes with a feeling of safety. Geographical profiling suggests that the initial crimes an offender carries out are most likely to be near to their home. However, because there is something called a buffer zone, means that they're not likely to commit their crimes right on their front doorstep for fear of being recognised. Crimes are less likely to be carried out too far away from the offender's home. This means that the initial criminal acts are most likely to occur relatively close to the offender's home or their workplace. As the success rate increases, there'll be a growing sense of confidence within the offender to travel a little bit further from home each time. It's thought that Thomas Sweatt set around 350 fires in total, and this would be far too many for me to map out and would lack any clarity. Therefore, I decided to take all of the offences from 2003 and map them out to see how they looked. This image shows the first 3 crimes in the series. As you can see, they are fairly close to Thomas Sweatt's home. The first one is far enough away from his home that he isn't going to be recognised, but it's close enough for him to return home safely afterwards. When he was carrying out the second crime, he wouldn't have wanted it to be too near the first crime because neighbours will still be vigilant. However, it still needs to be far enough away from his home that he's not likely to be seen or recognised. The third fire in the series needed to be far enough away from fires number 1 and 2, but still close enough for him to return home afterwards. We can see from the spacing of these crimes that if we draw a circle around the first 3 crimes, the offender lives within that region. Using principles such as this, the police who are investigating a series of crimes may be able to reduce a huge list of suspects down to a much more manageable size by focusing on offenders or suspects that live in that particular area. You can see I've marked out on the map where he lived and where he worked. As the series of fires goes on, he offends further and further away from his house as his confidence increases. What we can also see is that all of the crimes are committed around his home or his workplace. And this pattern of behaviour supports the routine activity theory. Us humans are creatures of habit. We can try and vary our activities, or in this case, our crimes. However, there's still a basic pattern that can be evident in where they offend. I do hope that you've enjoyed this psychological analysis of Thomas Sweatt. I will be covering geographical profiling in a separate video over the coming weeks, so do look out for that. It makes a big difference to me if you could like the video or subscribe or leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. Bye for now.